Hello. I'm going to adjust the lights. It's a one-man operation. Hello and welcome to the Fall 2024 Visiting Writers Series. I'm thrilled to welcome Stuart Ross as our first reader of the fall. Before I introduce him, a few thanks and announcements. I'd like to thank the Division of Arts and Humanities in the English Department for supporting living writers. And also, I'd like to thank the many years of support I had from Cindy Welch in the English Department and Humanities Department, who did so much behind the scenes to make these events happen. And also Gloria Cairo, who has taken over for Cindy and is now helping out in the same ways. And I'd like to thank Louis Friedman and the Woodland Pattern Book Center, who are setting up a satellite mini bookshop here, so you can see Louis at the table afterwards to buy one of Stuart's books or look at it. And also Stuart will be available to talk, to sign. And there's an additional selection of single copies of 5 other books that are not for sale by Woodland Pattern, but are for sale by Stuart, and Louis can handle that too. So there's we get to see something less than a third of Stuart's output with 7 different books over there, but we still get to see some. So please, after the reading, stay and take a look at the books and say hello. Also want to mention Woodland Pattern Book Center in Milwaukee. I mentioned the satellite store. If you want to see thousands and thousands and thousands of small press poetry books, there's no place better in the country to see that than at Woodland Pattern. So make a time to visit next time you're in Milwaukee. An announcement. Our second Visiting Writers Series event is the publication launch of the Oxeye Milwaukee Reader, published by Oxeye Press. Jordan Dunn, the publisher of Oxeye, writes that the Oxeye Reader is a journal of writing, art, and community. Each issue features work from writers and artists living in a distinct region or city. So there's been a Portland Oxeye Reader, there's going to be a Cincinnati Oxeye Reader, this is the Milwaukee Oxeye Reader, other places will emerge in the future. And Oxeye Reader is modeled after the beautifully myriad, often evanescent and companionable little magazines that have supported the literary arts for decades. The Milwaukee issue was edited by Jenny Gropp and Laura Solomon, and we will celebrate with a reading here at Carthage on October 29th, 6 p.m. in the same spot, featuring a poem or two from 11 amazing writers, including Brenda Cardenas, Brian Sherry, Louis Friedman, Annie Grizzle, Roberto Harrison, Ahi Lee, who's teaching here this semester, and more. I was going to make a joke about 10 amazing writers and me, but I decided that was false humility. So, and then on October 30th at Woodland Pattern, another dozen or 16 writers will read from the same anthology. So it'll be a two-night celebration of the Oxeye Reader and of Oxeye books. So I look forward to seeing you here then. And for that event, there's so many poets, there's also going to be a lot of pizza, which supports community in the same way that small press poetry does. Okay, now to tonight's event. It is my great pleasure to welcome Stuart Ross. Stuart has published more than 20 books of fiction, poetry, and creative nonfiction. This is the formal part of the introduction, and then the personal part. Most recently, the memoir, The Book of Grief and Hamburgers, which is over here, winner of the 2023 Trillium Book Award. The poetry collection, The Sky is a Sky in the Sky, which is also available at the table. And the short story collection, I Am Claude Francois and You Are a Bathtub. A Sparrow Came Down Resplendent won the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Poetry. Snowball Dragonfly Jew won the Mona Elaine Edelman Award for Jewish Fiction. And Buying Cigarettes for the Dog won the Relit Award for Short Fiction. So this is a much honored, much known, much published writer from Canada who we're thrilled to be bringing down to meet audiences in Milwaukee and Chicago and here at Carthage. Stuart teaches at the University of Toronto School of Continuing Studies and has visited classrooms across Canada to read and lead workshops. His poetry has been translated into an impressive range of languages, including Norse, French, Spanish, Russian, Slovene, and Estonian. And he runs the Feed Dog Book imprint for surrealist poetry at Anvil Press, which is a really wonderful poetry small press, and the 1366 Books imprint for experimental fiction at Guernica Editions, another amazing publisher. So he's been involved on both sides of publishing for many, many years. Active in Canadian micropress since the mid-1970s. Stuart lives in Cobourg, did I say that right? Cobourg, on the north shore of Lake Ontario. He's also the author of Pockets, as many of you know in my class. A beautiful, moving, funny, and harrowing assemblage of fragments, dreams, jokes, tales, griefs, and histories, something it shares with Stuart Ross's other intensely witty and wittily intense poems and prose. My classes have been reading, studying, admiring, and stealing from Pockets, especially Stuart's uncanny ability to find the connecting thread between the wild imagination of childhood and the wild griefs of adulthood and history. The sensation, at least for me, is akin to the thrilling calm I used to get running down one of those New England rivers in which one can leap from rock to rock down the center of the stream, never quite knowing where one is going to land next. Quotation. On the basement steps, on a piece of paper, I drew a guy getting shot by an arrow. Blood spurted out of his chest and gradually filled up the whole piece of paper. If Jack Spicer dreamed of attaching a real lemon to the page, the narrator of Pockets cannot turn away from the real blood spilling out of the page. As one of my students noted, thanks Piper, shout out to you, the things of the world or between the worlds have an active life in this book. Lamps throw shadows on the floor or make them leap across the room. Gravestones question mourners, wondering, where are the rocks on his head? Where are the words carved into his chest? One answer is that in reading Pockets, we are reading those words carved in the chest of the narrator, a thread that takes us back to the guy getting shot by an arrow, arrow of love, arrow of grief, the same arrow, the real thing coming out of the book and striking us in the chest. It's our blood filling up the page too, I'm thinking. But it is also a book of flying, of soaring, and laughter. Karen, the girl next door, was playing badminton with her friend. This is one of my favorite pages. I watched through our window. They had set up a net in Karen's backyard. Her friend wore a t-shirt with a TV star on it. The birdie sailed way up into the air, seemed to float on the breeze before falling back down to earth. It didn't care that she hadn't heard of the Beatles. Please welcome Stuart Ross.
Thank you so much, Rick. Appreciate that. And I learned a bit about my writing in your introduction, so thank you for that. And it's a real honor to be here at Carthage and be part of this series, and grateful to everybody involved in making this happen. And thank you all for being here, whether you've been forced to be here or not, I don't know, but I appreciate it. So I'm going to read some poems, and I'm going to read from Pockets. So I think I'll start off reading from Pockets. But you know what? First, so there's that book of Grief and Hamburgers. I thought I'd just give you a little introduction to my work from a reviewer of one of my books on Goodreads. She wrote, "For a poem book, I guess it's okay. I think I stuck through it only because I am studying grief, aging, and dying. Poem books are not my favorite." So always good to give you sort of a critical background before I start reading. So I wrote Pockets over a period of 5 days back in, I think, about 2015. And I hadn't read it again since it was published, and I just read it yesterday through. And there was some surprising things in here, and there were things that I thought they were too sad for me to read aloud. And so I made some selection, and I'm just going to jump sequentially through the book, even though the book itself isn't sequential. So this is a little novel called Pockets, for those of you who don't know it. And I'll just dive in. I'm going to start at the beginning and then hop my way through some of the book. I looked out my bedroom window and saw my brother floating over the weeping willows. His feet fluttered as if he were wearing flippers. His arms trailed at his sides, his fingertips pointing back to where he had just come from. Where he had just come from now looked like a hovering oil slick, glittering with traces of the moon's pale light. The houses crouched in their yards amid the damp grass, and they breathed almost silently. Every so often, one twitched or shuddered. Rain streaked down their windows. The tip of an evergreen was tilted by the wind, but it pushed back, straightening itself until it pointed toward the thick clouds. I stood in my bedroom at the foot of my unmade bed. I turned on a lamp, and my shadow was thrown across the floor. With effort, it pulled itself to its feet and lurched toward the window. The phone rang once, and then whoever it was hung up. I reached into the bottom of my pants pocket, grasped the seams, and pulled the pockets out till they looked like dog ears flopping against my thighs. They were empty. I counted to 18 and stuffed them back into my pants. Then I scooped up palmfuls of my own shadow from the floor and filled my pockets with them. The door to my parents' bedroom was shut. Gently, I pushed it open and peeked in. The television threw a glow onto their bed. They lay side by side, my mother and father, completely still. I heard the voice of Deborah Kerr in The Innocents. It was, therefore, some time after 1961. I slipped out of the house, into my car, and drove to the cemetery. I reached into my pockets, took out some small rocks, and placed them on the headstone my parents shared. I peered through my living room window at the house across the street and into their living room window. I could see my friend Stevie. He reached down and pulled out his pants pockets. Coins fell out and raisins, a baseball glove and a twisted menorah. Newts scampered down his legs and goldfish drifted into the air as if the living room were filled with water. Stevie pushed his pockets back into his pants, wiped the back of one hand across his nostrils, and disappeared from my view. Soon, his front door opened. He appeared on the porch. Then he was on the roof. Then he stepped out of his open garage. He walked away down our street, down Panhill Road. The street rolled up after him, revealing a dark ravine beneath. In the black and white photo taken 10 years before I was born, my mother and father looked like movie stars. They stand in a field, wind whispering through their hair. The photo whispered in my ear, "See how they smile? See their eyes shine? They have no worries yet, your parents." My mother. Her lips touched my forehead. She walked out the front door. A winter draft swept across the floor toward me and bowled me over. I heard her start her car. My grandfather's voice from downstairs. He called her name. I drifted along the hardwood floor. He called her name again. On the television, a president got shot in the head. When I woke up, I was surprised to find myself swimming through the air, my skin cool and damp from a light drizzle. Beneath me was an enormous weeping willow. I passed the window of a house where a small lamp threw light on the face of a boy lying in his bed, looking across the room and out the window. Just before he left my field of vision, I recognized the boy as me, peering out the window at his brother drifting by. Stevie was on his lawn cutting grass with hedge clippers. "Look," he said, "I'm cutting the grass." I reached in to help clear away some of the cut grass. The tip of my right index finger got snipped off. Stevie ran away. In the hospital, they put a rubber thing that looked like a nipple over my finger. My parents had to apply mercurochrome 4 times a day. It stained my finger red. I refused to go to school with a nipple finger. If a ghost floats in through your window in the middle of the night, is it impolite to ask whose ghost it is? A boy on the street looked at me as we passed each other. We were both wearing blue shorts and a Batman t-shirt. We watched each other as we slowly walked backwards. We forgot who was who. I was looking for Stevie. It was getting dark. I checked behind a stack of tires in his garage, in the bushes in front of his house, in my own backyard behind the red brick barbecue my father built, inside the dented garbage cans at the side of my neighbor's house. "Stevie, come out," I yelled. "The game is over. I have to go eat supper." Then a car pulled up, and he stepped out. He was an adult now and carried a briefcase. The weight of my own body had become considerable. I reached a hand to my face and found a short, rough beard. We stood before each other and squinted. Soon, a woman's voice rang through the dusk. "Stevie, dinner!" On the basement steps, on a piece of paper, I drew a guy getting shot by an arrow. Blood spurted out of his chest and gradually filled up the whole piece of paper. The name of the road my house was on was Pannyhill Road. Nobody was named Pannyhill. There isn't a country called Pannyhill. A Pannyhill is not a thing. Houses and trees and buildings and people were whipping by. Marky and I were in the back seat of his father's red Pontiac Tempest. We each had a big book on our laps, and on the big book a sheet of white paper. The books were there so our pencils didn't poke through the paper and wreck our drawings. Marky's father drove the car off the edge of the road, and we plunged into a ravine. This was the same ravine where Marky and I sometimes caught frogs. The car landed on its side. Trees grew right up through the windows. Marky's father told us stories about being a cook on a Navy ship. Sometimes the sailors, even though they were tough, got so seasick that they threw up their dinners right out the windows. After 200 years passed, a helicopter lowered a ladder and we climbed to safety. Marky's father pointed. "Look, you can see the ship I worked on right over there." We followed his finger, but all we saw was the Kresge's department store and a man running out of it, waving a gun in his left hand. I was alone. It was dark. I turned on a lamp, and my shadow leapt across the floor. I leapt after it. And that's my reading from Pockets. I want to mention, if you've read the book, you might have read that anyways in the back, that this was a book that was, it was inspired by a book called One Walked Out of Two and Forgot It, by a writer who used to live in Toronto named Toby McLennan. Toby McLennan, she lives in Brooklyn now, I think. And I read it first when I was 15 years old, and it blew me away. I couldn't believe it. I had read nothing like it before. And the book Pockets, if you haven't seen it, is the text is little bits on the bottom of the page. Someone pointed out that the pages are sort of like pockets with stuff that's fallen to the bottom of them, which had never occurred to me. But Toby's book was like that, and I thought, I want to write a book like that, because it's strange, it's disjointed, it's beautiful, and I wish I could write a book like that, and I tried to write it in a day. I thought, it's not long, I can write this book in a day, and it took me 5 days, and a little bit of editing afterwards, and it's about 80 pages, and it's 5,500 words, which is about 25 manuscript pages long, if you just actually put it out. But I hoodwinked the publisher into thinking it was an actual novel with all this white space on the pages, so I'm pretty proud of that. And I really appreciate the questions. A little earlier, I met with the class that's reading this book, and first of all, I'm so grateful. I am really proud of this book. Like, I was really proud of it, but I know it's a weird little book, and it probably didn't sell many copies, and to find out that it was being studied here at Carthage was amazing to me, and I love this idea of this book getting another life, and there were so many intelligent and interesting questions about it earlier tonight, so I'm grateful for that. I'm going to read a few poems now. I'm going to read a bunch of poems, so I have 6 more hours to fill. I don't want to disappoint anybody. Rick maybe jokingly said maybe one of the things you could read is the poem that you'll collaborate with Lisa Fishman on the train here to Kenosha. So I'm going to read the poem that I collaborated with. One of my favorite things about collaborating with people on stories or poems or anything, there's 2 things that is great. One is that you get to be complicit in a poem that you yourself could never have written and do different things. And the other thing, well, there's 3 things. And the other one is that if you don't like it, there's someone else to blame. And then the other thing is that I love to work with writers whose writing I wish I had written, and this is the closest that I can get to that by collaborating. So, along the railroad tracks here in Chicago. A dog. I just saw a person walking a dog, barking at their dog. A person is a hard thing to get to know if the dog is tight-lipped or a dog painted on a cheap vase. Saying truth is beauty, and beauty clatters down out of the tree like a sucking stone ricocheting off Charles Olson's molars. But there you are, as Gina Rowlands said to the night when I feared night's terrible ink, and the day was not yet blue, and I heard you run across a field of trembling clouds, because my head had become an ear, so that what was far was near, like all the thistle a dog can smell without thinking. So, even if poem books are not your favorite, you gotta like a poem like that. What will I read from first? I'm gonna read from a little bit of older book first. This is I specialize in stupid titles, aside from Pockets, which is a very sort of bestseller title. This is Motel of the Opposable Thumbs, a book of poetry from a few years back. I'll read a few poems from this one. So there's a guy mentioned in the beginning of this poem. I used to work for an Entertainment Weekly as a copy editor in Toronto, and it was all these creative types that were editing and writing, and then there was the horrible bureaucratic capitalist types that were running the show there and destroying the paper before our very eyes. And this was initially inspired, the beginning part is sort of inspired by this guy. He, a poetics. He put the donuts on the table, a box of them. He was making some point. You are all donuts in a box. If you could choose only one donut, why do donuts have holes in them? I don't remember his point, but he was making a point in the name of team building. We all hated him. He could not buy us off with donuts or with philosophy built around the existential hole in the middle of a donut. He hated us too. I wanted to phone him up wherever he is now and tell him his fucking donuts make no impression on me beyond the fact that he put a box of them on the table. I hope he has failed in everything in his life. I hope he is estranged from his family. I hope he is walking up and down subway cars, holding out boxes of donuts to people who don't give a shit what his donuts mean. I hope his faith in capitalism has collapsed. I'm walking my dog. Because it is 21 degrees below 0 Celsius, and because it has snowed, and the people of my little town have dumped salt on the sidewalks, even though there are more dogs in this town than there are humans, I have put little red rubber boots on my dog. The name of my dog is Lily. We found her at a rescue in Cornwall, Ontario, near the Quebec border. They called her Lily there, even though her papers say her name is Croquette. She is of French-Canadian origin. The heater in my car isn't working. I just get cold air when I turn it on. It is very hard to make friends in a small town. There are 8 pizza places here, but no Indian food. Like me, Lily doesn't like donuts or the lessons they might teach us. A lot of poets think it is important to write poems that are about issues. They judge poems by the stance the poem takes on issues. Lily and I decide whether we like a poem just by its tone and the words it uses, the images, the juxtapositions. We don't really care what the poem means. If Lily doesn't wear those little red rubber boots, they're actually more like tiny balloons, then she will walk for a bit and suddenly she will lift a paw and look up at me with this helpless look. She will walk on only 3 paws. I pick her up and gather her into the warmth of my jacket-covered arms, and I pull her close to my body. Things have really changed since I was a child. Back then, dogs roamed free. When they'd been out for a while, you'd open your door and you'd call them. Soon they would arrive on their porch. They would put down their little briefcases and fold their glasses into their glasses case. Back then, there was only one kind of donut. Oscar Williams edited all the poetry anthologies. You would watch the black and white TV from a motel room and see a man jump around on the moon. Every good poem, according to Lily, ends with the word moon. One of the great influences and heroes of my poetry life was a guy whose poetry I came across when I was in my teens. His name is Ron Padgett, a poet from New York City. And I couldn't believe his poetry. It was so weird and funny and often about serious things, and it was so conversational and absolutely like great literature that's sort of wacky at times. I got to know Ron, and in fact, well, there's a little true thing about the first time I met him, I should say. So that's in the poem, and it happened not too far from here. So I have this anthology of poems read by poets, and one of the poems is this poem, June 17th, 1942, read by Ron Padgett. So that's what sort of sparked this. Ron Padgett's poem, June 17th, 1942. I'm listening to Ron Padgett, and he is 28 years old. June 17th, 1942 is way heavier when I hear Ron's young voice reciting it than when I read it on the page in Toujours l'amour. Was he really that mean to his grandparents? Was his mother really the saddest person on earth? Outside, it is raining. The moon ripples behind smudged clouds as if the real world were an old horror movie starring Lon Chaney Jr. The first time I saw the actual Ron Padgett was in the Art Institute of Chicago. He was walking along beside Anselm Hollow. How tall he was, like a giraffe, with 2 F's running off the end of his name, like the 2 F's in giraffe, which he said are like 2 giraffes running through the word giraffe. I saw Ron again 20 minutes later when we crossed paths again in another room in the gallery. I don't remember what the art was, but it was probably something contemporary, maybe some Jim Dine, some Yoko Ono, because I don't like much of the old stuff. And then, one more time, I passed Ron and his friend Anselm in yet another room, and I heard him speak. That warm voice coming from his bespectacled tallness reassured me that this was the world I had chosen, poets weaving in and out of galleries 24 hours a day. And later, I saw him and Anselm Hollow read at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. After, my friend Richard Huddle took a photo of Ron with his arm around my shoulder when I finally introduced myself to him. I'm the guy who sent you that chapbook, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ron Paget, which I didn't actually say, but look how it adds dramatic effect to this poem. An arm of Ron Paget was around my shoulder. And now Ron is old, and I'm close to old, though already old, to the young poets who have no interest in me. And Ron is doing something right now. Anything that Ron does is interesting, in my opinion. So he is doing something interesting now in New York City, where he lives. Now, when I'm writing this, and now when you're reading this. Maybe he is listening to his 28-year-old self read June 17th, 1942, the day he was born. But I doubt it. Maybe he is sitting in the Neptune diner eating a bowl of matzo ball soup and thinking about some untranslated poem by Guillaume Apollinaire. I am listening to the sound of car tires rolling up and down Division Street in Coburg, where I live, and you can tell the streets are slushy with snow and rain from how that sound sounds. I have never stopped to think about the word household. A household is comprised of all the members of the family who live in the house plus the servants. I summon one of my servants. He tells me he has never stopped to think about the word summon. I bet someone wants me to go fetch a book by Ron Paget, he says. I ask for triangles in the afternoon, which is located in my piano bench. Now, here is the strange thing. I just researched triangles and discovered that the triangle falls into a class of musical instruments known as idiophones. Yesterday in Toronto, I bought the book Idiophone by Amy Fusselman. I didn't know what an idiophone was, but I bought it anyway because I really liked her books 8 and The Pharmacist's Mate. The first line of Amy Fusselman's book Idiophone is, I can't sleep in this uncomfortable New York City cab. Once in New York City, I was with Ron Paget, and we saw his friend, Richard Hell. Name dropping is the best way to end any poem. So you can see that I disagree with my dog Lily, who believes that moon is the best way to end any poem. And actually what happened was, so I lined up, after Ron's reading, I corresponded with him a bit. I lined up, and I was like the last person in line. I finally got to him to sign one of my books, and I said, hi Ron, I'm Stuart Ross from Toronto. And he went, security! And what a funny guy, then he put his arm around my shoulder. So, if you haven't read Ron Paget, I really recommend Ron Paget. Whatever you desire. Look at the tree burst from the top of my skull so recently mown as my friends disappear. Look at my car losing control and sliding off the road into the snowy ravine as my friends disappear. Look at the drunken sky pressing its ugly belly into the fragile mountains about to collapse as my friends disappear. Look at the fine zigzag cracks forming on my ankles and spreading toward my groin as my friends disappear. Look at Saul Bass's credits for Vertigo as my friends disappear. Look at the rabbits cowering in the closet of the motor vehicle registration office as outside the air becomes filled with balloons as my friends disappear. Look at the blood leaking from this plate of vegetables as my friends disappear. Look at my father phoning me once again from the dead. He forgot to mention that he buried all the Monopoly pieces in a Seagram's bag in the backyard on Panhill as my friends disappear. Look at my friends, the backs of their heads, their brains pushing out of their ears again, their legs moving like mechanical stilts, their words spilling from their mouths like blinking neon lights as my friends disappear. Look at the remains of the toy soldier I pretended to kill in the staircase of my high school in 1974. Look at the door lying in the center of the lawn and imagine what would happen if you opened it. Look at my grandmother's Russian accent. Look how she fries up the chicken fat. Look at her putting my grandfather's dinner on the tray in front of him as my friends disappear. Look at the crane in the distance. Smell the gasoline as you stand in front of your brother's grave. Look at the frightened boll weevil. Look at the cartoon penguin on the TV as mother lies in a coma as my friends disappear. Look at the clock. Look at the tangled hair in the comb. Look at the oil the car left on the road and how it glistens and takes on the shape of whatever you desire. That's one of those wacky, funny poems that sometimes, I have a poem over, there's leaflets over there. So after you buy the two books that, the spectacular Woodland Pattern bookstore, which is legendary to me because I first read about, I first heard about it, I think in the 80s, is that possible? Used to be an amazing magazine called Fact Sheet 5 that was all about zines and weird little publications, and somehow I discovered that and Woodland Pattern Bookstore at the same time, and I've never been there, and I will visit it this week. I'm so excited. So after you buy my two books there, you can take a free poetry leaflet. You can also look at some of the other books I have there. So I'm going to read from this book, The Sky is a Sky in the Sky. And I was mentioning earlier to the group that I talked with earlier that when I was 15 years old in Toronto, some amazing, crazy hippie poets came and taught us. This is back in the mid-1970s, for a week. They taught us for a week poetry. And one of them, we had little workshops, and one of them, the guy went through about 80 of my poems, and he crossed all of them out, and he said, okay, this poem has got some promise, and pushed up the other ones aside. And I worked on that one poem all week, and then I didn't write for a year and a half after that. But one of the other students, this guy, Joe Rosenblatt was the name of the poet, he folded this kid's poem into a paper airplane and flew it across the room. And that was his critical evaluation of that poem. Okay, so Joe was with Coach House Press, so he took us down to Coach House Press, which is this legendary, probably one of the most prestigious places to publish a book of poetry in Canada. And I dreamed, at age 15, I dreamed someday I would have a book from this press. And it only took a very brief 50 years until that happened. And that book just came out a few weeks ago. And that's what I'm going to read from now. And I don't know all of the poems I'm going to read because I handed it to, may I mention that, Lisa? I handed it to Lisa on the train and said, can you mark some poems for me to read? And I don't know what she's marked. So that'll be fun. I love poetry. I hate poems that contain the word mortal, the word angel, the word liminal, the word beauty, the word scent. Mortal coil is particularly loathsome, though any coil was mortal is passable. I hate poems that mention Perseus, Heracles, Hephaestus, Infestus, Hydrochloroxidius, but I like hideous, rancid, gizmo. Oh, Orpheus is okay if it's in a poem by Mark Strand. Eclogue, blech, epilogue, pretty good. I hate the word ekphrastic so much it makes me hate ekphrastic poems, except for Ron Paget's Joe Brainerd's painting Bingo, the best poem ever written. I met Joe once to interview him and was delighted he had never heard of Margaret Atwood. I hate poems that contain the phrase I love, unless they are written by Lisa Jarneau, and I love Lisa Jarneau's poem, Lisa Jarneau. I hate poems that want to teach me something. Epigraphs by Isaiah, Leviticus, and Dana Goya are non-starters. I once offered Alice Burdick, Jamie Forsyth, and Lance LaRock $200 to start up a photocopied mag of Nova Scotia poetry. Another time, I cut off part of my thumb with an X-Acto knife. I hate myself for loving poetry. I love myself for hating poetry. I hate poems about poetry. Okay. If you insist. Alternating leg motion. It's amazing, those legs beneath me. How do they decide which one goes first and which next? How do they decide where to carry my torso, my arms, my noggin? It's stupid when he calls it a noggin. they think. How do they decide which streets to haunt, or when they will limp? Maybe they'll leap, or fold me into a deep chair from which I will never rise. I write a letter to the editor, re-alternating leg motion. My legs demand a full retraction. Soon, I am lying in a simple pine box. Shovelfuls of dirt land on my noggin. It's stupid when he calls it a noggin, they think. And then they start again, one leg, then the other. My knees bump against wood, one knee, then the other. How do my legs choose which knee to bend? Might one knee bend twice in a row? I know we're not getting anywhere. Therefore, my flesh melts away, and soon I am only bones. Each leg, just bones. My noggin's a skull. It's stupid when he calls it a noggin, they think. My legs are the keynote speakers at a conference on intersectionality in the motion of alternating legs. During the question period, a young student in a wheelchair asks why they don't move in unison, like my wheels, she says, and demonstrates. One leg is speechless, and then the other. Film festival. A movie about two people. A movie about two can openers. A movie about death crawling through a supermarket. A movie about the tension between competing products. A movie about a wise turnip. A movie about silent music. A movie about books with no pages. A movie about a pill that erases memory. A movie about I can barely lift myself out of this chair. A movie about exhaustion. A movie about walking into a wall. A movie about a porcupine that becomes sheriff in a small prairie town. A movie about an unfilled grave. A movie about dancing with my grandmother at my bar mitzvah. A movie about ashtrays. A movie about lining up at night in the cold. A movie about noses. So a mentor of mine, the New York poet Larry Fagan, who was a friend of Ron Padgett, in fact, told me one of the greatest pieces of advice he gave me is to put boring endings on your poems. And he's right, he's absolutely right. Like, don't do anything clever, don't do any fireworks, don't with the big meaning, the moral of the story. Just have a boring line at the end. So a movie about noses, I thought was the most banal thing there could be, so that's why I ended it that way. But it's really cool, you should try it, really try it. It gives, I think it gives the reader a lot more space to move around in your poem when it's done. You don't like seal it up at the end with a bow. I've never read this poem aloud, Lisa. And I'll give you a little background on it. Was a fantastic American poet named Bill Knott. And Bill Knott started publishing in the 60s. And after his second book, maybe Corpse and Beans, he sent out a mimeographed letter to all his publishers and all these publications saying that Bill Knott had ended his own life. And then from then on, he began signing his books, Bill Knott 1944 to 1966, or whatever, and he kept publishing, having done that. And he was a really cantankerous guy. And I got to know him a little bit because I published a chapbook of poems by him. And then on social media, this is what happened. This poem's called Bill Got Pissed. Bill got pissed when I mentioned that book he wrote with Jim. Said, "How dare you bring that up? Why do you torment me?" I said, "I love that book. I had no idea it would bug you." But Bill sliced me from his life. However, I still love it, wish it was back in print, and I wonder what Jim would think of that novel now if he were still alive, and Bill is dead now, and they are both dead, and I gently place a copy of Lucky Darryl in your lovely, trembling hands that I adore. The Jim was the poet James Tate. I think they got really, really stoned in the 1960s and wrote that novel. And it's spectacular. Oh, there's another one I would never choose. Math and Science. It's dedicated to my late brother, Barry. I was 35 when Mum died. at 66, 41 when Owen died at 46, a tiny lull then, still 41 when Dad died at 76. Now I am 60, Barry, and you are gone 4 days now at 69. For 19 years, it was just us two. We talked on the phone 1 time a week, 988 times, except 1 year when we said 0 to each other. So that's 936. If we saw each other 1 time a month, except for those 12 after we fought, that's 216 times we saw one another when it was just the two of us. The final wisp of smoke from your final cigarette may still be perceivable among the clouds. The precise composition of smoke depends on the nature of the fuel, the temperature of the flame, and wherever the hell the wind is going and whether it's in a hurry. Math and science are ways to not think about things that are not math and science. This is a poem written somehow after, I don't remember what the process was, but it was written after a poem by Barbara Guest, who you should all read, a book called The Night of Sun. This is called Sufficient Evidence, Opus 19. My feathered enemies lurk by the foaming flames, their foreheads damp in the winging breeze. My thoughts are concave, like the ragged tooth trembling in the archway of your pitiful gob. The instruction manual says I am a loser, puffing in a monsoon of ginger ale and shivering sand. Night arrives. It has curves in all the right places. Its language melts with the snow, revealing creatures of armor and sundry wacky farm critters. I occupy my shiny hands, rock like a leaf on a rock. I gather sufficient evidence. I give myself a tetanus shot. Next thing you know, thin streams of light separate my toes. I give each a name. Great thing about asking someone else to choose the poems you're going to read is that you'll end up reading poems you've never ever read aloud before, and then you can read it as if you're exploring it for the first time. So, B- on that one. No, I don't know. It was interesting. I didn't know what was coming up. One day in 2023 for Lori. It's 2023 and we're all flying around with jetpacks strapped to our backs. Holy cow, we gotta get somewhere, that place we gotta get to, but you can't even see the sky. So many goddamn people flying around with their jetpacks going wherever the hell they're going. Really, you have to fly above everyone else to even get a glimpse of the empty sky, and everyone tries to fly above everyone else. We're like a cloud of aphids, like a stampede after a football game, like infinite leapfrog. Down on the ground, a terrier, maybe a Bichon Frise, sniffs at a fire hydrant, circles it a few times, lifts his leg, and as God is my witness, out streams a sparkling ray of sunlight, and lo, we are saved. I don't have a lot of religious poems, so I'm glad I got to share that one with you. Oh, wow, okay. So if you know Chicago, this poem took place at, I wish I'd included it at Diversey is how you pronounce it? Diversey Harbor? Diversey. That's where it is. Chicago, in memory of Richard Huddle. The foamy water reaches now to the cold blue sky. Richard sat here too, on this wood bench, saw this too. Now he is ash, in the grass, in tree bark, and in my hair, I hope. What am I doing here? Can't explain poem, after Lisa Jarnot's Tell Me poem. I can't explain cartoons that feature dolphins, and I can't explain why I constantly check if my headlights are on and my stove is off. Plus, I can't explain your poetry, my actions, the concept of grief, the shape of my mother's face, so I walk along the sidewalk and wait for someone to walk along the sidewalk alongside me, carrying a broken umbrella or maybe a paper bag of snap peas, plus an extra head for when the first one gets tired, and a trail of cartoon animals, both black and white and color, struggling to keep up with the science of the brain. I'm going to read either one or two more here. Oh, that's nice. Maybe I'll read three. Couple of really short ones. This is called Song. It's for an Ottawa poet and a dear friend of mine named Cameron Anstey. The bird in my ear is a bird in the wall, is a bird in the air, in a tree. I'm going to skip one of the really short ones and just go to this one here. So this is called The Dot Was Red, and do you know what Harlequin romance novels are? Does anyone know Harlequin romance? We have 1, 2, or 3 nodding heads. I'm sure you've never read them, but you know what they are. I worked at Harlequin, and I explain all that here, so I'll just read the poem. The Dot Was Red. In 1992, I read how I could put a dot somewhere. I looked a lot. And every time I looked at that dot, I'd remember to... I worked at Harlequin Enterprises then, copy editing romance novels. I lived in a tiny cubicle there, and I had a phone, and I had a computer, and I put a little sticker in the form of a red dot on my phone. I must have seen that dot several hundred times a day, and every time I saw it, I remembered to... If you would like further information about my tenure at Harlequin Enterprises, you can reference an old poem of mine called Around the Building, in which I talk about things that really happened and also things I made up. One thing I really liked about that job was bumping into Glenda at the subway station where we both waited for the same bus. Glenda worked across the road for a record company. Plus, she wrote songs and played guitar, and she shared some of those songs with me. Glenda had red hair. We once went to see Kiss of the Spider Woman together. When we stepped off the bus, Glenda went to her building and I went to mine, where the first thing I saw when I reached my cubicle was the red dot. Immediately, I was reminded to... One guy we worked with had a party in his apartment. He invited us all to come. He didn't have any food or drinks for his guests. There was half a chocolate cupcake in his fridge and he ate it. I went out to the store and bought 2 big bags of potato chips. I resented that he didn't reimburse me for them. At one point, some of us were out on his balcony, and he was inside, vacuuming his living room. At Harlequin, I edited 200 books about love and about killing. The love books were temptations, romances, historicals, suspenses, desires. The books about killing were Mac Bolan, The Executioner, Deathlands. I developed crushes on 3 women at Harlequin and wanted to kill 1 man. I watched the York Mills bus pass by every 20 minutes on the street below. The dot on my phone was red. And I think I'm going to just give, because I have 1 minute, I'm going to use that up. I'm going to give the last words to one of my favorite Harlequin romance novel authors, Lass Small. And she wrote, almost all of us kept little sheets of paper with all our favorite lines on it. I used one in a poem. Okay, so one I used in a poem was, it began to rain large drops with spaces between them. I thought that was amazing, but this was the best because she wrapped her arms around him and placed 1 hand on each buttock male and female. And I'll leave that with you, and thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Stuart. Thank you, everybody. Come look at books, buy books, take pamphlets, greet the author, eat a cookie.
All at the same time.
Tuesday writers, let's meet briefly in the corner here if you want to grab